take my mask off now that I'm up here. Good to go. Again, my apologies for being delayed. We were waiting for one of our cameras. I'm Constable Rob Carver, Winnipeg Police Public Information Officer today. Beside me is Paul Managra from RCMP, also a spokesperson for them. One release which we will both answer questions on based on how it's split in terms of sort of shared responsibility. So on October 30th this year, just this past weekend, investigators from the Winnipeg Police Homicide Unit and members of the RCMP Major Crime Services charged a 37-year-old male concerning 3 related incidents that had all occurred on October 27th in the city of Winnipeg and in the community of New Bothwell, Manitoba. Trevor Robert Farley, 37, of Winnipeg, has been charged with second-degree murder concerning the death of Stuart Farley, 73, on Toronto Street, that occurred in Winnipeg on the 27th. First-degree murder concerning the death of Judy Swain, 73, in the community of New Bothwell, and attempt murder concerning an assault that occurred on October 27th at Seven Oaks Hospital. The accused has been detained in custody. At this point, I'm going to immediately turn the mic over because we're going to do this sort of in timelines. I'm going to guess, and we'll start with RCMP. Thanks.
Thank you, Rob. Yeah, good morning. I'm Sergeant Paul Managra, Media Relations Officer for the RCMP. I'm just going to kind of speak quickly here, briefly, regarding the incident in New Bothwell. And this incident basically was reported to the RCMP in St. Pierre-Joli at approximately 12:45 a.m. And at this point, officers attended, and it was a well-being check request on an elderly woman that was at the residence. So when officers arrived, that's when they located the woman to be deceased. They determined quickly it was a homicide. From there, in speaking with residents in the area, we determined a suspect. With this information, officers then advised the Winnipeg Police Service of a description, of a name, and from there, it kind of unfolded within a span of 2 hours where, like I say, an arrest was made. Our officers then proceeded to the address on Toronto Street for what was to be a notification of next of kin, whereas then we located the next deceased male. So frankly, say you got a situation that unfolded like honestly within less than 2 hours. It's dynamic, it was quick, a lot of work had to be done in that time frame. So I can't thank the Winnipeg Police Service enough, like say for the collaboration with the two homicide units kind of having to work together quickly to put all this information together, and then, like I say, to make an arrest within a very short time frame is excellent. So I'll turn it back to Rob to kind of speak from where it went from there. Thank you.
Okay, specific questions?
What was the relationship?
We'll start here and kind of move in a zigzag here.
Okay, the same question. What's the relationship between the suspect and all of the 3 victims?
You know, sometimes we have difficulties confirming that, but it's effectively out in the media. So I am going to tell you that that the suspect was the son of the 2 victims.
Of the 2 homicide victims?
Correct.
What about the relationship with the man who's at Seven Oaks Hospital?
Other than I know that he was an employee of WRHA, I don't know specifically the relationship, and I don't know if we will be able to divulge that even if we get it. I mean, our homicide investigators have it, as does RCMP, but in terms of PIOs being given that information, I don't see we'd be getting there.
I have a couple questions about just the timeline, essentially. So you said that 12:45 a.m. the well-being check was reported to RCMP?
No, this would have been 12:45 p.m.
Okay, and then that followed on.
Yeah,
Who
sure.
called in the well-being check?
That would have been a family acquaintance of the victim.
Was it the suspect themselves?
No.
And how, so then...
Maybe we'll sort of move along and you can come back for questions.
Go ahead.
Sure.
Can you talk about the distinction between the first degree and second degree, why those charges related with respect to the individual?
In relation to New Bothwell, we've laid the first degree murder charge in relation to there's a premeditation, and in consultation with the Crown Attorney's Office, that criteria was met based on the evidence at scene And when you put it all together, a premeditation was apparent, evident, so sufficient to lay that charge.
And that wasn't evident in the, at the second scene?
I can't speak to the second, I'm not aware of circumstances for that.
Sure. So I'll see if I can answer that. And I'm going to answer it in a way that I often do, which is less than direct, but I think it will flesh out the answer. The criteria for first-degree murder is laid out very specifically in the criminal code. We always start looking at the most serious offense. If we don't have evidence that supports that, we move down to the next stage. So if second-degree murder charges have been laid, that says without question that evidence did not support a first-degree murder charge. So I can't tell you about the specifics of why it was second-degree. I can tell you that by the nature of the charge, there wasn't sufficient evidence to lay first-degree. I hope that kind of obtusely answers your question.
Give us the timeline that they were discovered, the victims. Is that the order that you believe they were killed?
I'm going to go over the timeline again because I think there's some confusion. So as Sergeant Managra has said, this starts in New Bothwell. Very quickly, information is determined that the likely suspect who is not in New Bothwell is likely in Winnipeg. RCMP contact us incredibly quickly, provide us with enough information that we start to look for the suspect. Our investigation, and I will not get into details, determines very quickly that the suspect was likely in the area of McPhillips and Leela. We're sending police resources to McPhillips and Leela as crews in the car are notified of a disturbance, a severe disturbance. I don't know if it's indicated initially that it's an assault within the hospital, at the front end of the hospital. They divert their attention immediately there, because they're within, hundreds of meters from that location. Get there to have that scene sort of unfolding in front of them. The assault has just taken place, and the suspect is being held by people within the hospital as we walk in the door. So he's taken into custody instantly by our guys as they walk in. The incident occurs at a hospital, so there are medical professionals who are dealing with the victim. We've now arrested the suspect. RCMP are going to be notified. I mean, there's a bit of a domino chain, but they're going to be notified very quickly. I can turn the mic back over to Sergeant Managra if you want to go through then what happens regarding that next stage.
Sorry, that's immediately after.
So now we've arrested him, and you're going to do a notification.
Yeah, that's when we've identified a residence of interest on Toronto Street being involved with the family. So our officers from St. Pierre attended to this location, and that's when they located the male deceased. We then informed Winnipeg Police Service, the homicide unit, that we believe this was related to the incident unfolding, and they immediately dispatched crews to this location to further that investigation.
So just to be, just to be clear, so, because you seem to indicate earlier that New Bothwell happens, and then your officers go to Toronto, but I just want to make sure.
Yeah, that's correct.
So as in, it was after the incident was reported at Oaks or before? We just want to.
So I think I know what the confusion is here. I'm going to try and clear it up. If you're looking at police response, regardless of agency, it's New Bothwell, Seven Oaks, Toronto. If you're looking at timelines of the occurrence of the events, investigators believe it was Toronto, New Bothwell, and Seven Oaks. Is that going to clear up your confusion?
Toronto first.
Yes.
In terms of time.
Yes. And in terms of your question regarding first versus second, I think part of the answer is buried in that.
And did the homicides take place on that same day, or could they have happened a day earlier, a couple days earlier, and then you just happened to find them that day?
I think investigators are of the belief that they all occurred very quickly during that period.
Within a very short period of time, would it be accurate?
So the Toronto homicide happens first and then New Bothwell, just so we're clear.
That's my understanding, kind of, as the timeline is being
Any
identified.
determination about when the Toronto was? Because at 12:50 or 12:30, your officers are called, 12:45, whatever, your officers are called to New Bothwell.
Yes.
Any determination when Toronto may have occurred?
No, I don't have that information to speak.
But a tight time.
Yes.
And again, I want to do something we don't normally do here, but I know this looks confusing, and I'm sure it's going to look a little confusing on Facebook. But this doesn't typically happen, and here's what's going on, is we have two jurisdictions, which means separate cases. And I mean separate, right? The RCMP runs theirs, we run ours. Do we collaborate? Absolutely. But in terms of the case, I don't have access to details of theirs, and they don't really have access to all. They have access to the details, but the ownership is residing with the two agencies. So it's inappropriate for me to talk about, say, for instance, New Bothwell, because it's not a WPS case. And while the RCMP were first on scene on Toronto, because it's within Winnipeg, the jurisdiction is ours and our investigators take over. So if this looks a little disjointed, that's why it's somewhat like that. There's nothing we can do about that.
Are you able to comment on the manner of death at all in the two homicides? We know there was a stabbing at Seven Oaks.
The only thing I'm going to comment related to New Bothwell is it was a violent assault. I'm not going to get into specifics on how or a thing. I'm just going to say it was violent, and that's all we're going to say on it.
What's the condition of the woman who was stabbed? Is she still in hospital right now? Serious condition? ICU?
I know she's been stabilized. I know the injuries were horrifically severe. I know that while she went absolutely critical, she's been stabilized, but my understanding is she's in the hospital. She will be in the hospital for some time. And again, I'm into a gray area here. Provincial legislation really requires I not divulge medical information, but we try and err on the side of, given the public nature of this horrific assault, I think it's incumbent upon us to give you enough context to understand what we're looking at. She's not out of the woods. That's my understanding.
Is there any motive at all for any of these attacks?
Not that I can speak to. I'll turn the mic over. I think.
Yeah, as far as the RCMP, no, I think that's something both major crime services units, that's something they're going to try and hopefully put together. Not sure if that's information we're going to provide unless we feel it can perhaps further the investigation, but that's probably one of the bigger pieces of the puzzle that, like I say, there's 3 people involved here. That's something that we obviously want to try and find out.
Well, we've heard that from sources that Mr. Farley, the accused, was adamantly against receiving a vaccine, and that it could be jeopardizing his employment.
I'm sure that's all matters. Like I say, these investigators will look into all the aspects, and then, like I say, look for tips. They'll follow up any leads, and it's like, say, if the evidence will point, hopefully, to a conclusion or provide some information.
And one more in that area. We've also heard from a variety of sources that he was either in the psych unit, trying to get in the psych unit and didn't get in, or that he walked away. Can you say anything?
Well, as Rob mentioned before, we don't speak to the privacy, under the Privacy Act, we don't speak to a person's health information.
On that note, I mean, you can't go against FIA, and I know that, but the officers last week said that the suspect was undergoing a medical assessment. Why would that happen after someone has been taken into custody? Because from my understanding, that's not totally normal.
Well, what's normal? I mean, every homicide ends up being incredibly unique for all sorts of reasons, even though I think sometimes to the public, they aren't. The reality is that when we arrest somebody, there's various scenarios that could result in the individual having to have medical treatment or assessment. Sometimes there's force used. Sometimes there's a suspect will try and flee and they get injured. And I'm just talking hypotheticals. This is not this case. Sometimes, prior to laying charges, we need a psychiatric assessment. I am not able to tell you what the situation was here. If we didn't provide you with that information, that there was a medical assessment going on, the obvious question from the media, and it would be a valid question, is if we've arrested a suspect on Thursday and it's Sunday morning, you're going to be calling going, why haven't you charged him yet? So I thought it was really important for us to be able to say, as did the RCMP, that that was a key element of what was happening, so you would understand the delay. I can't give you the details, but I did need to give you the, you know, the framework.
So you can't say whether he was being treated for injuries or
I cannot, but if you look at what we said, we haven't. I don't want to give out more than I'm allowed to, but I know my colleague said was under medical assessment. And I know when someone is being treated for injuries, we typically say they're being treated for injuries. So you can deduce from that what you'd like. I'm stuck here in terms of very strict provincial legislation, but we've already made some statements that I think kind of fill this out. Mr. Turner, you have a question?
My question is for Pat from the RCMP. How can you not have motive but yet have evidence of premeditation? How does that work?
You mean for me to stand here and discuss motive? Like I say, there could be a motive. Like I say, we're just not in a position to provide that information. Like I say, that's going to form part of the investigation.
That wasn't what I heard you say. What I thought you said is that you were piecing together the motive and hadn't quite reached a conclusion yet.
Well, I'm hoping, like I say, I don't speak to my major crimes teams 24/7, so I'm hoping they're trying to put it together. They may have everything that hasn't been provided to my office. It's nothing.
And James, I'll try and just flesh something out at a broader level. Again, as Paul said, we can't get into details, but I get asked regularly about motive, certainly in homicides. And we work very hard to not attribute motive in press conferences because it's often speculative. Unless a suspect states categorically, I did this because of this, and even then, that's a statement. Is it actually true? Can we get inside, an accused's head? In terms of the situation here, speculation regarding the accused's past is simply that. What factors in someone's life move from stressors to a person committing a murder? We're not going to speak about that, but I can tell you that the factors underlying first versus second degree murder have more to do with deliberate actions than motive. So I know in TV they talk about, the motive, but the charges are really predicated on the actions of the individual preceding the event and sometimes after, but not specifically because we can't get inside what their thought process was.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Where is the suspect being held in custody?
Suspects in Manitoba are typically held in one of two places, depending on the situation and their judicial process. So either Winnipeg Remand Center, the Provincial Remand Center, or they get moved to Headingley Jail. I don't know this morning the exact location, but it will be one of those.
So he's not in hospital?
No.
Would you say he's cooperating at this point?
I am not able to answer to that. And if I had the information, I think it would be possibly prejudicial to the case, and I wouldn't be able to answer.
Well, a question for Paul.
Yep.
You talked about the violent assault in New Bothwell. The officers who respond, do they get or what's the procedure at that point for the officers to get counseling? I know we've talked a lot about with Winnipeg Police, when they come across a particularly violent incident, there are steps now in place. Is there similar, I assume there's similar.
Yeah, the RCMP will have some protocols in place where you'll kind of examine the case that you're dealing with. It's like a case-by-case basis, depending on the degree of violence. You may put a priority as for the timing. So you've got to look at the impact, how this could affect the number of officers that attended the scene. So like a debriefing will be held. We'll put those some procedures in place. That's like there's things available to help them if it needs, to the extreme, if it's a counselor, anything like that, or a grief counseling, anything like that. We'll provide those services to our officers.
Can you kind of speak to the kind of scene that the officers came upon in New Bothwell in terms of how that affects them?
Well, I can't speak to this case specifically, but if I look at, like I said, my 26 years of policing, it's like you've come across things that you're not expecting. Officers are attending to a residence to do a well-being check, which I've done hundreds of times, if not even more. You're not expected to get to a residence and all of a sudden be surprised with a violent homicide scene. Does it affect officers? Absolutely. Is it traumatizing? It can be, because it's something you're not prepared for. Like I say, we see this, our officers don't want to say on a daily basis, but depending on where you're posted or the kind of unit that you're in, these types of events can be a little more commonplace. So like I say, you have to put those procedures and protocols in place to kind of provide the assistance to officers.
Well, I know you can't give too much information here, but can you maybe describe a little bit how the suspect was determined to be the suspect, like the son, so quickly?
Well, basically, we're the new Bothwell residents. There were several other residences in a very close proximity. So in speaking with some of the neighbors who, in that location, everybody knows everybody. So they were able to quickly determine kind of who stopped by. And like I say, then the pieces fell into place, and then the officers started. At that point, it becomes just getting that information out, kind of putting it together quickly. And then how far is this expanding? And then it's like Rob kind of mentioned, you've got 2 units kind of investigating 2 different cases, and then all of a sudden you start thinking, oh, okay, maybe there's a bigger piece here. So it's like that kind of takes time. But like I say, the officers, they got on it pretty quick. And then like I say, providing that information is key.
And you described that one, you wouldn't say how it was the homicide happened, but it was I guess a vicious or a violent attack. How about the one in Toronto, bro? Can you tell us about that scene?
I can't give you details, but I can tell you that my understanding is the 2 homicides are similar in their details. So it was violent. There was no firearm involved that I'm aware of. Beyond that, I can't give you more.
Can you say how long he was under assessment before police started questioning him, or when did police?
I can give you an approximate timeline. So he was arrested on Thursday afternoon, mid-afternoon, somewhere around 2 p.m., I believe. Investigators only began dealing with him, I believe, Friday evening. So when someone is under any type of medical treatment or assessment, just like you would see or expect, our officers will make sure that the individual can't be released on their own. We're waiting to take them into custody, but we can't take them into custody while they're being treated or assessed.
Just to follow up on that last one. So no firearm. Was there a weapon used at all?
I'm not going to be able to go into that. I'm sorry. I wish I could, but I'm not in this case.
This may be jumping ahead a bit, but do we know what Mr. Farley, the suspect, was doing in the days before this happened?
If we did, we would not disclose it at that point. That would be part and parcel of a homicide, 2 homicides and a attempt murder. So we would not be able to give you that.
Do you know if he was working?
I don't, but if it. So again, I don't want to go off on a tangent here, but one of the things that happens when PIOs stand up and talk about cases, but specifically homicides, is we hold such a position of sort of holding the details of a case that what we say can ultimately hugely affect a trial. And we are really bound to a different standard than other people speaking than yourselves in terms of what we can disclose. So you can go and do all sorts of background work and write a piece well researched. I am not able to do that as effectively as part of law enforcement. It would be viewed as prejudicial to a case. You have a luxury that we don't.
The suspect obviously moved some distance throughout the day. Police believe he traveled in a car. There was a vehicle towed away from the hospital. Can you say if that was the suspect's vehicle? It was a royal blue 4-door car.
I don't know the details of the car. I know we towed the suspect's vehicle from the hospital. You may have more details on that on that than I do. Yes, the mode of transportation was a vehicle.
And just for clarification, a few minutes ago you said he was arrested Thursday afternoon. I just want to make sure that arrested and in custody are 2 different things. So
yeah, there's sort of 3 elements here. It's arrest, it's detain. So that there's the elements. We can detain someone and not arrest them as part of an investigation. I haven't said that. I believe he was arrested at the time of detention, meaning read his charter rights and advised what the pending charges were likely going to be.
And that would have been Thursday?
That would have been at our initial contact with the individual. For the formal charges to be laid, they were finally sworn to before the courts on Saturday. I don't have a specific time.
Okay. So I'm just trying to be clear, just to make sure, because a lot of things happen in a lot of time. He's detained.
Let's just say the word arrested, because the two would be almost identical at the same time. An officer comes up and puts their hand on you. You're effectively detained under law at that point as they're explaining why they need to talk to you. But what he's saying is the mechanics of arrest. So the conversation is, you're detained almost instantly, but within seconds, the explanation for the detention is the effecting of an arrest. Sir, I'm placing you under arrest at this point in time. You may face the following charges. We would have arrested him on Thursday for some charges related to the assault. They don't know all of the details. They probably looked at assault, aggravated assaults, something along those lines. We wouldn't have known enough information to look at attempt murder. Responding officers are uniform officers in a patrol car, not investigators. So he's arrested Thursday afternoon. Medical assessments or treatment is undertaken, and then once the medical assessment, once he's released medically, officers, both ourselves, WPS and RCMP, would then take him into custody, put him into an investigative area where the investigation can unfold. He needs opportunity for counsel. There are questions to be determined, identity to be confirmed, and once that process is completed and enough evidence is determined, then charges would be sworn to.
Okay, I guess what we're both confused with what I'm asking. The incident happens on Wednesday, you say you...
Oh, did I say, I kept saying Thursday, no, my mistake, I only came back Friday. The incident happens Wednesday, and he was arrested Wednesday.
Okay, that's...
Yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah,
My mistake.
Whether he was arrested or not.
No.
Yeah, it's...
That all happened Wednesday.
Yeah.
In terms of the Seven Oaks stabbing, from what we understand, security at the time that it happened was, dealing with a call from police or like being potentially warned that someone was coming. Is that true? Did police call ahead to Seven Oaks and say there might be an incident happening?
Not that I'm aware of. Our officers responded to a report of a serious incident at Seven Oaks. So someone, I don't have it in front of me, made a call to us saying there's an incident at Seven Oaks.
Not the other way around.
Correct.
And do we know why the person who was stabbed at Seven Oaks, do you know why she was in the atrium at the time?
I do not. And if I did, again, that would be part and parcel of a large criminal case, and I wouldn't be able to disclose it. Anything else for either Sergeant or myself? Thank you very much.
Thank you.